Welcome to the Eat Fresh Veggies Podcast. I just want to give a huge thank you to everyone who has supported the podcast, everyone who has commented me and messaged me, telling me how much they love the content and how much they are looking forward to future episodes. So yes, huge thank you to everyone who has came through and has been such a big support system to this project. You can support the podcast as well by liking, commenting, and hitting the notification bell so that you can be notified of future episodes. And please share this video with people that you think that are in need of this information, because I really want this information to be accessible to everyone. You can also support the podcast by checking out the description below for my PayPal and my GoFundMe. I'm really trying to get some new equipment to make higher quality videos, as well as interfaces that will help me feature guest speakers on the podcast. So yes, please check out my GoFundMe and please check out my PayPal account. And yeah, let's go ahead and hop right into it. So in this episode 2 of the podcast, we are going to be discussing the different types of plant-based eating and the differences between each of these varieties. So this list isn't necessarily a very strict list when it comes to food and, adopting new eating styles. It's fair that we're always in a different space. Some days for myself, I'm vegan. Some days I'm a healthy vegan. And some days, I like to eat my junk food. And while on other days, I might be a raw vegan and only consume raw foods. But for our listeners, I really just wanted to compile a short list of the different varieties of plant-based eating so that you can decide what type of lifestyle or direction for your dietary habits is best for you. So we're going to get started with defining the definition between what is a vegetarian and what is a vegan. Usually when we look at mainstream media and when they talk about plant-based eating, they usually just limit it to vegetarian and vegan. However, today we're going to be extending that list to types of plant-based eating that you may have not heard of that may be more universal in other parts of the world that also practice plant-based eating. But we're going to get started with vegetarian and vegan, and we're going to compare those two for a second so that you can gain a better understanding of these two lifestyles. So a vegetarian, for those who are new to the podcast and are new to this entire lifestyle, a vegetarian is someone who does not eat meat. So they do not eat cow or beef. They don't eat chicken. They don't eat pig or, what we call pork. And they also do not eat fish. They do not eat any flesh is usually kind of like the shorthand how it's defined. So no meat, no animals. However, they are still consuming animal-derived foods such as dairy, eggs, cheese, and gelatin, other animal-based food products, just no meat or no flesh. Now, moving on to a vegan, which is what I currently am, is someone who does not eat any animal-derived foods. So that includes that list of meat, of animal-based meats, but that also extends to not consuming any eggs, no cheese, no dairy, and no other animal-derived foods such as gelatin or honey. Now, we can kind of get into the different degrees of veganism, but I really want to leave it there to make it digestible for you. A little taste into how deep this rabbit hole can go is, some people say like, oh, are you like a junk food vegan? I don't know if you have ever heard of that, or are you like a healthy vegan? And even though they have varying degrees, for this episode, we are just going to make it a very digestible definition of someone who does not eat any animal-derived foods. Now, if you are curious about what are some other animal-derived foods and a more complete understanding of the vegan lifestyle and the many facets to veganism, in addition to just food, how veganism extends into beauty products, health products, how veganism contribute or interacts with environmentalism and climate change, please check out my description below and please contact me at my email. I do vegan consultations, and right now I'm offering the first consultation is free. So if you are interested in connecting with me for a more rounded explanation into what veganism is and the vegan lifestyle, check out the description and contact me, please. Now, this is the part of this list that gets a little interesting. The term vegan, vegan, was coined in the 1960s, and it is a relatively new term. But as anyone who knows any world history, is that plant-based eating has been practiced all throughout society and all throughout human history. Despite what mainstream media and its restrictions on the definition of vegan, really restricting it to are you vegetarian or are you vegan, we are going to touch a little bit into what is plant-based eating and the many practices that you can get involved in this lifestyle in addition to just eating plants. So I'm going to go into the direction of something that I myself am transitioning into is a plant-based eating. So even though vegans don't eat any animal products, they still consume alternative or substitutions to these animal products, which for cheese, instead of eating dairy cheese, there are vegan cheese alternatives like Daiya cheese, Go Veggie cheese, and Chow, which is a really good brand. And some substitutions for eggs may be the Just egg. You have the vegan egg that came out not too long ago. And even when it comes to, meats, some vegan meat alternatives, I'm sure many of you heard of the Beyond Meat burger. You have Gardein. Gardein has a lot of meat alternatives. And of course, the one that has been around for, I think, one of the longest times is a tofurkey. So those are some meat alternatives. And even though they are by definition vegan, I often help my clients, understand the more well-rounded approach to veganism by also adding the category in of plant-based eating. And plant-based eating is someone who, yes, indeed is vegan, but mainly focuses the core of their foods on mainly plant-based alternatives. So where a vegetarian may still consume milk, dairy milk, a vegan may consume soy milk. However, some of these milk alternative brands, have different types of chemicals or preservatives in them. A plant-based eater might just, make their own milk and kind of cut back a little bit on some of the preservatives and the additives to some of these vegan foods that are out there. Another example, let's take meat. A vegetarian doesn't eat meat, a vegan doesn't eat meat, but they will still consume meat alternatives. Like Gardein or tofurkey usually use Vital wheat gluten or textured vegetable protein, which is often a substitution to creating meat-looking but vegan foods. A plant-based eater, in comparison, might actually use lentils or chickpeas as a base for their meat substitutions or for their protein substitutions, and kind of free themselves from some meat substitutions that may not necessarily be healthy for you or are necessarily easy to digest. So a plant-based eater, yes, of course, isn't consuming any animal products, but they may be a little more favored into, sticking really to plants and freeing themselves from some of the chemical additives that are added to meat substitutions today. The next definition that I often help my clients with is, informing them of kind of the next level, if you will, is raw veganism. So a raw vegan is someone who does not consume any, or of course not consuming any animal products, but the foods that they do consume are often raw, dehydrated, processed through fermentation, or processed in a way that keeps them below 170 degrees. So this magic number 170 is studied that is around the temperature where the enzymes in the food start to break down. So if you are interested in preserving the enzymes and the complete uh, health of a certain food that you're eating, then you may want to consider raw veganism. Raw veganism, in comparison to a vegan diet, a raw vegan is able to digest better a lot of the foods that they are consuming because their foods are not cooked. They're usually free of any saturated oils. Usually olive oil is something that raw vegans enjoy using. Peanut oil, oils that really kind of have their own flavor profile. And by not cooking foods at 170, like I said, you're able to maintain the cellular structure and the enzymes of the food so that you are getting all of the nutrients of the food and none of it is being cooked or steamed out. So I am actually transitioning to a raw vegan diet. And transitioning is something that we are always going to be doing because I am still consuming cooked foods. I've been vegan for 8 years. Well, and for 7.5 of those years, I was eating cooked foods. I was eating processed foods like Gardein or Beyond Meat. So I'm in a transition where, if I do eat, a cooked meal, I will try to make it more plant-based. I will try not to use as many additives or chemicals as in some of the brands of these meat alternatives. But I also have been experimenting with just keeping it raw. Like yesterday, I made some lentil burgers, but I didn't put them on the stove. I just made the meat patties. They tasted amazing. Still hooked them up. I put them on a bed of lettuce and I hooked them up with some tomatoes and some onions. Like, it was amazing. So, a raw vegan is just mindful and is just working towards consuming a mostly raw vegan diet. And because their foods are, our foods are not processed, there is by default a naturally higher amount of fruit being consumed. Leafy greens. Instead of like cooking them or cooking them down, you can massage them, which is another way that you can process raw vegan foods. And also just preparing various types of marinades. Like mushrooms is really good. That's something that I've been eating a lot more of because in lieu of eating meat and that texture of meat, I've been learning more about like the marinating mushrooms and allowing some of the chemical reactions and the salts in the marinades actually break down and cook, I'm using air quotes, cook the mushrooms into a more palatable taste. So yeah, a raw vegan it's always going to be a journey. Some raw vegans that I know today still eat cooked foods every now and again. And in that same breath, I know people who have been raw vegan for like 10 years, you know. There is no such thing as a restriction. It's always just a practice and it's a transition. Lastly, I wanted to speak about this isn't so much as a category as much as it is a definition or a way to define plant-based eating for you. And that is going to be ITAL living. Someone who is ITAL, of course, is vegan by default because they're not consuming any animal products or any products derived from animals such as dairy, cheese, butter, etc. However, someone who is ITAL is incorporating a mix of cooked foods and raw foods, but is always very mindful of the nutritional content of these foods. And often, ITAL can be defined as, someone who just doesn't use any salt in their food. So they're very mindful of the health benefits and the health profile of the food, and also extremely mindful of the salt intake of the foods that they are eating. I really wanted to end off with the definition of the ITAL meal because it kind of stands as a symbol of how long we've been eating plant-based foods. The idea of ITAL eating has been throughout the Black community, especially throughout the Caribbean area, where a lot of people are Rastafari, where they have been eating ITAL for, I mean, hundreds of years. And a lot of them brought those eating habits over with them when they were forced into human trafficking and forced into slavery. So that idea of plant-based eating and healthy eating has been bubbling throughout the Black community for hundreds of years. I mean, if not thousands of years. And the reason why it's really important to, I really wanted to add the idea of ITAL eating in there, because as I mentioned earlier, the word vegan was created in the 1960s by a white man, and it is often used today to define someone who does not eat animals. And I really just wanted to mention ITAL eating as an example of, the foods that we eat. This idea of plant-based eating has been pumping through the Black community for since well before the 1960s. So in future episodes, I am going to be discussing food history, plant-based eating in the ancestral and traditional African culture. However, I really just I want all of my listeners to really consider what are some of your vegan goals. If you are just interested in just cutting back your meat intake, but you're still going to be eating meat and dairy, then vegetarian might be ideal for you. However, if you're someone like me who has been, transitioning, I transitioned from vegetarian to vegan, and then from vegan, I'm moving into plant-based and more raw foods. That might be something that you're more interested in if you're kind of, trying to put some distance between, cooked foods or super processed foods or high salt foods. So definitely review this list and really ask yourself, what are some of my health goals? What are some of my vegan and plant-based goals that mostly align with you? And as you will learn in this journey, that is all, like I said earlier, it is always a transition, and even in myself, I mean, I'm living proof of it. I'm healthy vegan some days, and other days I'm like, yeah, I'm totally going to eat this entire bag of like potato chips, But yes, I want everyone to take a moment to really meditate on what plant-based eating means to you, and even if it's not something that you see yourself achieving necessarily anytime soon, we all have an idealistic goal that we feel is best aligned with our health. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the second episode of the Eat Fresh Veggies podcast. As I mentioned below, please check out the description below to see my GoFundMe and my PayPal account and how you can help support this podcast and help me start to get some better equipment so that, we can be on and popping. And yes, please check out my description below. As I mentioned earlier, I am doing vegan consultations, and the first consultation is always free. So if you are interested in a free vegan consultation, you can check out my email account below. You can also see me on social media. My Instagram is at Eat Fresh Veggies, and you can also listen to this podcast on SoundCloud. So yes, please check out all of those platforms, and thank you everyone for supporting this podcast. Thank you. Bye.